Are you struggling with mouse and keyboard? Maybe you're on a controller and keep wanting to try it, but you don't know where to start. Well, I'm here to tell you that that's completely normal to feel that way. In fact, let me be clear. It's entirely okay if you choose to stay on the sticks forever. But if something's holding you back from trying it, let me help you out. You see, I played on controller for literally decades, and then I made the switch and never looked back. I'm addicted to challenges and the improvement that stems from it. Fun fact, actually, I switched from inverted to default on my aiming thumbstick after 20 years of using it one way, and I actually got better. This was all because of a guy named Nolster who just said, "Try it, dude, you might improve." Since jumping over to PC, my setup has evolved over the years and I've learned a lot. Step 1. Do not get a desk with the fucking tray to use your keyboard and mouse. Actually, scratch that. Episode 1. The mouse and sensitivity. In the beginning, I thought there were two kinds of mice. The one with the ball, and then of course the one that doesn't rely on a friction-based sphere. Microsoft, they're a big computer company, right? How could they not know everything about a mouse?
Right?
Oh yeah, their audience. Forgot that was a thing, like a really important thing. So let's reset. You hop onto Google and you search gaming mice. You'll probably come across one called the G402, or maybe the Hero version of it. It looks like it's from outer space and it weighs as much as the dog that I wish I had. It says it's for gaming though, and that guy Ninja used it once, so it must be S tier. Well, no, this is why I'm sharing my story. After going down the rabbit hole many times, both online and in practice, I've outlined a set of guidelines for you. Whether you follow it or not is one thing, but I promise you it will open perspectives that I wish I'd known about early on. Now, right before I get into that, I've actually had a few of my subs reach out to me and say that my videos haven't been showing up in their sub box. I've done some research and it turns out that YouTube doesn't always put a new video in your sub box on your app unless you turn the notifications on. I've got a lot of good Crucible tips coming up and I thought I would bring this up to raise some awareness. If you're new to the channel, my primary focus is on PvP in the game Destiny 2 at the moment, but if anything FPS is of interest to you and you end up enjoying this video, you might want to consider subscribing so you can catch some of the next videos. Additionally, we've got a community growing pretty fast in Discord right now. There's a link in the description if you want to join us. We have a ton of people that know everything there is to know about Destiny, whether it be PvE, PvP, or any FPS game in general. We'd love to have you, and without further ado, let's get back into it. Rule number 1, the type. Certain types of mice match certain types of games. You've got FPS, MOBAs, RTS, MMOs, etc. I'm here to talk about first-person shooters in particular. One of the most important things in an FPS is hitting your shot. Aiming with a mouse will trump button pressing on a mouse every day of the week. Each time I reduced the number of buttons and keybinds on my mouse, my brain had less to think about with that hand and my aim improved. I recommend keeping it to around 2 buttons max on the side, for example. Rule number 2, your grip. I realized over both time and many mouse iterations that my grip seemed to define itself by the mouse shape I was using. This was okay at first because it let me find what I liked best, but one day I had to stop being such a beta and just go with what made my aim the best. It was only then that I knew what kind of mice were right for me. There are infinite ways to grip a mouse. Looking at dozens of pros in the world, it's clear that each one can work. But for simplicity, I'm going to show you 4 different types. The way I first interpreted the palm grip was quite literally putting my palm directly on the back such that I could move the mouse without ever having to actually use my fingers. I thought the benefit was aiming with my hand while my fingers did all of the button pressing. I used this for a very long time. A complete variation of this would be the fingertip. Essentially, you have no palm touching the mouse whatsoever, and you control it entirely with the tips of your fingers and your thumb. A third type that I like to reference is actually a bit of a hybrid between those two. There's a lot of people out there that like to have a palm/fingertip grip. They like to have a little bit of the micro adjustment capability of their fingers, but they move their hand back a little bit so that it's not just their palm moving that mouse. Most would obviously label this as a palm grip, but I felt it was important to show the difference between this and the version where your fingers are applying no pressure at all. Lastly, you've got something called the claw grip. Some people like to put the butt end of their palm, in other words, the bottom of their hand, right up against the back of the mouse, and their hand kind of wraps around so their fingers are in an arch or a claw form in towards the button instead of laying on top. After using a palm grip for ages, a fingertip claw hybrid turned out to be my jam. I grip it like a claw but further back, and no part of my palm touches the mouse. That was mostly comfort based, but the fingertip grip was all about my newfound ability to achieve the best micro adjustments possible for myself. It came at the expense of button press reliability, but it was well worth it for the improved aim. Rule number 3, the size. This one actually goes hand in hand with the grip. I noticed my hands feeling weak after long gaming sessions. Was I just weak? Am I at the point in life where the doctor says, nah man, that's just a new thing you have now. Welcome to being old. My mouse was too wide for my wrist. Did that mean I needed to switch back to a palm grip? Do I just deal with the pain? Fortunately, I realized how much better smaller mice were for me. Not only did a smaller mouse remove my pain, but it also improved my aim and helped me break all of my Kovac scores yet again. There's a channel called Rocket Jump Ninja, and he does an excellent job of reviewing mice, explaining how the size of your mouse based on your hand size and your grip preference all works together. I highly recommend him. Rule number 4, aiming mechanic. That's right, the mouse and the mouse pad that you purchase will directly impact the way you end up aiming, or vice versa. The method of which you end up choosing to aim will determine which mouse or what size of mouse pad you end up going for. Taking my experience so far, we now know that I gradually went to a smaller mouse over time, but my mouse pad also actually grew. In fact, I started with a 200 by 200 millimeter mouse pad, then 250 by 350, then 300 by 900, and now 600 by 1200. Yeah. The trend is obvious. As my experience grew, so did my commitment to hitting the target, even if it meant going off the mouse pad and knocking a drink over. As my mouse pad got larger, my aiming mechanic also started to evolve. In fact, it went all the way from wrist only to arm only, and now I'm at a really nice combo. When I was a wrist only aimer, I found myself more or less crushing the quick target snapping, but fine tuning was tough. My sensitivity had to be so high just to stay on that damn mouse pad. So every time I lowered my sensitivity, I found my body naturally snapping to the targets with my arm instead of my wrist, and then after that, any micro adjustments would just naturally happen with my wrist only. It was sort of like, again, keeping it simple for my brain, but adding a layer of capability and skill. I've really come to appreciate a large mouse pad that can accommodate lower sensitivities. Rule number 5, sensitivity 1.0. This is the part where !sense is spammed and shrouded in Tifu's chat a billion times a day. Yeah, I was that same person. It's fine. I'd say, okay, his sensitivity is 14.7, perfect. I'll do that, and then I'll finally get that bread. I go down the Google path yet again, and I find something called DPI, this thing called dots per inch. Yes, I'm aware of PPI as well. You see, mice have their own built-in sensitivities. Microsoft doesn't want you to go home, plug your computer in right before a work meeting, and then struggle to function with the cursor moving like crazy all over the monitor. They set a default DPI for the mouse. Think of it like this. A manufacturer makes a mouse and they say, when little Jimmy moves this mouse by X amount of distance, we want the cursor on screen to move by Y amount. Because they've done their research and they realize that most people will be comfortable with a certain sensitivity by default. That relationship is defined by the DPI number. If you were to buy a standard mouse off the shelf, like one of those HP ones, for example, well, they're typically between 1200 and 1600. What that means is they're going to move 1200 dots within that 1 inch that you move your mouse. If you move it 10 inches, that's going to be 12,000 dots that it's going to move across on your screen. But we'll get into this in a bit because gaming mice have a lot of options. Forgetting about DPI just for a second, let's just say you pick one and you like it. What you want to do is go to your Windows settings by following these steps and set this to 6 out of 11, right on that middle tick mark. And then after that, you want to turn enhanced pointer precision off. That's an accelerant, or in some cases a decelerant. Is that even a word? Anyways, it adjusts the rate at which your mouse moves based on your hand in a non-linear fashion. Same deal here with Windows. They don't want you missing that little X on Excel, so they help you out. The problem is, remember, their audience is not gaming. It doesn't work the same way with hitting targets in a game, for example. In fact, it messes with the raw mechanics of your brain figuring out the relationship of your mouse's sensitivity. Some say they aim better with it, but the vast majority do better with it off, especially if you're jumping in between games. Pro tip is to check every game you play. Some of them actually have this option on by default within their game. Now that you've got your baseline and you know it's on an even keel, let's start with mine and explain why it matters. Taking Destiny 2 on PC, my hipfire sensitivity is 9. My mouse DPI is 400. That means my true sensitivity is actually 400 DPI multiplied by 9 in-game for a total of 3600. Others call this your eDPI, but it doesn't really matter. It's just a way of comparing your true sensitivity amongst others. You don't want to compare just 9 versus 9. You want to compare the total versus the total. Looking back at another pro, they might also be on 9, but if they have a DPI of 800, that means their true sensitivity is actually 7200. Big difference. So what should you run for DPI? Well, that comes down to preference because your DPI is going to be what your mouse feels like when you're outside of the video game space. I personally am fine with 400, but I guarantee when you try that the first time, you're going to hate your life. The mouse moves really, really slow on Windows, just doing standard tasks. I came to get used to it and prefer it, but you might hate it. However, there's a reason I forced myself to get used to it. Let's take a new example. Let's say I'm running 1600 DPI and 2 sensitivity in-game. That's a 3200 true sense. Maybe I feel like I want to up that a little bit, so I go to 3 in-game. My new total is 4800. That's a pretty big jump from 32 up to 48. And it's all because each step is by the amount of my DPI. Every time I bump my sensitivity up, it's going to go up by 1600. I ended up sticking with 400 because A, there's no real empirical data that exists yet to prove that 400 is a detriment in terms of sensor performance, and B, it's a small bump that lets me have more choice. I can test plenty of totals between 3200 and 4800 because every time I bump my sensitivity up, it's only going up by 400. For Destiny in particular, I've had countless people come back to me saying they went from something insane like 90,000 true sensitivity to around 4,000 over time, and how much more consistent they are now that they're at a lower total. I seriously recommend you consider it. A couple more things to be aware of are FOV, resolution, and refresh rate. The higher the field of view, the slower it feels. Look at these two side by side. Identical sensitivities, moving at roughly the same rate, and yet they look extremely different because of their FOVs. Don't compare with others unless you know what they're using. Resolution also has similar impacts. If they don't hold the same aspect ratio, they can really mess with it, and some people out there use stretched res, and we're not going to dig into that. But lastly, the higher the refresh rate your monitor is, the smoother things will feel. I know I'm kind of brushing off these topics, but we can always revisit this if enough interest exists. Rule number 6, wait. As my aiming method evolved, so did my taste for lighter mice. My wrist health and aiming ability improved yet again when I went down the road of less weight. Never again will I use a mouse above 80 grams. My personal preference is that between 50 and 70 grams is perfect, but who knows what comes out in the future. I'm waiting for wireless mice to catch up, and Glorious is getting close. In fact, Razer's got a really good one with their Ultimate. Seriously though, stop using a brick for your mouse. Alright, last but certainly not least, sensitivity 2.0. Let me reiterate that much like grips, all sensitivity ranges can work at a very competitive level. Take Hiko and Mendo for example. They were in those earlier clips that I showed you, and they're both on completely opposite ends of the spectrum when it comes to sensitivity. So to anyone new here, I'm going to help you out by basically generalizing it into 3 different buckets of sensitivity. We'll call the fast sensitivities a range of 20 to 27 centimeters per 360. You'll notice that I use something completely different. I'm not talking about true sense, am I? The second bucket I'm going to label as medium sensitivity. That's around 28 to 35 centimeters per 360. Then the last bucket I'm going to call is lower sensitivity. Anything 36 centimeters and above I consider low sensitivity, but in some cases you will see people well above 40. Now, why did I all of a sudden switch over to centimeters per 360? The reason is because a lot of people like to switch from game to game, and sometimes it's even harder again to compare true sense in one game versus true sense in another game. So all it is just this universal all-around baseline for people to compare. The amount of centimeters it takes for you to move your mouse to complete a full 360-degree circle in game. You could do this, put the old school measuring tape down on your mouse pad, measure your mouse from point A to point B while you go from one line in the game to the next line in the game, just like that example I just showed you. But hey, there's a lot of smart people in the world, and there's calculators out there. So you can actually go to the website that I link below in the description, and you can just put in your information and it'll tell you what your sensitivities are. It will also help you switch from game to game, so you can convert it right there from one game to another, because every game has a different mechanic on how they calculate sensitivity. Since my core audience is all about Destiny 2, let's talk about that. Taking Walla, for example, one of the best snipers I've ever watched play this game. he actually runs 1600 DPI and 4 in-game cents. That converts to a 6400 true cents and right around 21 to 22 centimeters per 360. Taking someone like Potato, who's also an incredible sniper who has placed very well in a lot of tournaments over time, he runs 400 DPI and 7 in-game sensitivity. That's a true sense of 2800 and 49 centimeters per 360. Now, a lot of the consistent tournament winners in Destiny 2, the vast majority of them run true sensitivities of between 3200 to 4000, and those relate to about 34 to 43 centimeters per 360. In fact, a really good friend of mine named Patty Cakes has been recently looking at a lot of the pros across a lot of games, and he's actually come to the conclusion that there's a particular average that seems to be common among the best of the best. And in that video, I believe he's going to teach you a little bit about what scenarios to do in that game called Kovacs. So if you'd like a primer for that and you enjoyed this stuff today and you're really interested on improving your aim, I'm going to play a little bit of a clip right here from my other video where I talk about how much the impacts of sleep and aim training can really impact your ability to perform in a first-person shooter. If you click the thumbnail on the bottom right-hand corner, it'll bring you right to that video.
Practice does not make perfect. Practice with a night of sleep is what makes perfect, because you come back the next day and you're 20 to 30% better in terms of your skilled performance than where you were at the end of your practice session the day before. Sleep is the greatest legal performance enhancing drug that most people are probably neglecting in sport.